One did you take out? So.
I just didn't expect it.
Okay, yeah. And would you like me to put it back in here?
Yeah, I would rather be.
Okay, so let me mark that.
If you can just say
It was a beautiful renovated space.
Yeah.
Inside, one of the buildings, you go, yeah. So I saw that. I haven't seen the library, but
It's just in the library.
Spread out a little bit. All right. All right. Ms. Kinney, we're going to get started. All right, welcome everyone. It's good to be here. Sorry to interrupt, but it's about 3 o'clock. So I want to make sure that honoring folks' time. We have a closed session after this for student assignment appeals, and we have a full agenda. So it's 3 o'clock, and so I'll call this meeting of the Policy Committee on June 29th to order. We've got a full complement of committee members. Ms. Carter is here, Mr. Hegarty, Ms. Cash is attending on WebEx, Ms. Johnson-Hostler, Ms. Haggard, Ms. Mahaffey, Dr. Martin, Ms. Scott are joining us in person. So we have, as I said, we've got a full agenda. And are there any questions about the agenda as listed? All right, so we'll just dive right in and start with approving the minutes from the May meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and the minutes are now part of the record. So we're starting first with Policy 3225, Technology Responsible Use, as the policy as well as the Rules and Procedures, the R&P. We've got Ms. Marlo Gaddis, who's here to present, and I think a lot of the changes are on, we've looked at this before recently, but I think a lot of the changes, just given what we've learned in the last year, trying to have lessons learned and improve our practices. So Ms. Gaddis, if you could present this with us, and if this is for committee review and for committee approval, and then it will go to the full board and replace the current 3225. Ms. Gaddis.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Kushner, board members, and Superintendent Moore. Today I'm bringing to you Board Policy 3225, which is the Technology Responsible Use Policy, and it will be a revised policy. Revisions reflect updates made by staff and in collaboration with Tharrington Smith. When given final board approval, it will replace the current Board Policy 3225. As Ms. Kushner mentioned, the revisions being presented to you today are in response to two issues. One, the increased use of technology and the ability to take home district devices, as well as the collapse of Board Policy 3013, which we thought was already collapsed and is now fully collapsing, which is the Employee Acceptable Use Policy as well. So getting into the policy, just a quick update. The first, under A, expectations for use, we're going to strike the first sentence in the paragraph. With the increase in the use of technology devices, curriculum, and digital resources, technology is not really a nice to have anymore, and it really has become part of our general school supplies. So it is no longer a privilege, but it is part of what we do every day. In the second sentence in the fourth paragraph, we struck out uses and changed to may use to match language that's later on in the policy. The uses was not struck out in your version. That was a typo, so our apologies on that
So
one.
the intention is to strike uses. And
Correct, and it would
thank you.
replace the other. Yes, ma'am. All right. Make sure I got them all right here. All right. Under rules for use of technology resources, maybe I got them upside down. Hold on. I think I got them out of order. Give me 1 second. I do. I have them out of order. Give me a second. All right. Rules for the use of technology resources. I'll get there eventually. You'll notice that we have student personal use of school system technological resources for amusement or entertainment is also prohibited. After speaking with Jonathan a few minutes ago, I think we're going to keep that piece in. So that will be a change in the next revision of that policy.
I'd like to understand a little bit why necessarily to keep that in. I mean, and I have somewhat of a similar issue with the next point, but we'll take that when it comes. I agree that we do not want the devices supplied by, the school to be abused for gaming, texting, entertainment. But I think, prohibit is a pretty strong word. I think the subsequent language, some incidental and occasional personal use, I think that makes good sense to sort of recognize that this will be occasional, but prohibited is pretty strong language, and I guess I'd just like to understand why. Number one, I don't think it's enforceable.
Which is why we originally marked it out, correct?
And number two, are we? I mean, this, as we've looked at the discipline policies over the years or practices, when there are things like this that become prohibited language, they're rarely equitably enforced, and they have a tendency to be applied when, for lack of a better term, you're trying to punish that kid, as opposed to something that is, comprehensively administrable, for lack of a better word. So I actually was happy to see that line struck because I thought it made sense with the rest of the paragraph. Bringing it back in, I'm concerned.
Can we let Mr. Blumberg, do you have a
I'm happy to respond, and ultimately, it's a board call. The language in the next one talks about employee use that is some incidental and occasional personal use by employees is inevitable, but that's more for the personal use by employees, infrequent and brief personal use by employees. But the language prior to that, student personal use of school system technology resources for amusement or entertainment, is also prohibited. And it ultimately is a board call on that, but the fact that it's in the policy and then would be struck would create the impression that you all are okay with your technology that's designed for school and educational purposes being used for amusement or entertainment of a personal nature. So that was why I suggested that be left in. The language could be modified, and if the board's pleasure, it can be struck. But that's when I saw that was my rationale behind the suggestion that be left in. It's not about occasional or incidental personal use, and that similarly could be for employees or students. It could be inevitable, but the question is do you all want to be okay with for amusement or entertainment? And so that's up to you all, and if the board wishes to strike that, then it's certainly within your authority.
Ms. Mahaffey, did you want to add? I'm sorry.
I was just wondering, how do we even define amusement, for example?
Yeah.
And kids could be exploring something amusing for any number of reasons. Ms. Mahaffey, that you wanted to add to?
I'm just curious if we can turn it into more of a positive, right? Like, this should be used for school use. I think it's a really hard thing to track. Obviously, there are times when it is inappropriate in class, and I think that is something that, the teacher would acknowledge. But I think, if a student has to take a laptop home and happens to log into Netflix and watch a show, I don't know, if we're going to know or if we should punish somebody for doing something at home. And so I think it's hard. I think there's a way of spinning it, though, into a positive of, it says right there, school system technological resources are provided for school-related purposes only. So I don't know that we need to list out all of the reasons, but I also hear the concerns, but I don't know that we need to list all of them.
And I kind of like the idea of saying because
some incidental and occasional personal use is inevitable by both employees and students. Should we acknowledge, is that concerning to acknowledge, Mr. Blumberg? I mean, to me, it does seem, as Dr. Martin said, the ban would be hard to enforce and probably unevenly enforced.
So I see it enforceability kind of like, I mean, the cell phone use in schools was
Right.
banned for a long time, and it was just, it was ridiculous because it never was enforced, or, well, I shouldn't say never was enforced, it was inconsistently enforced.
Correct.
You know, and I think, too, it's not just our laptop devices, right? We're providing hotspots to a lot of kids because we live in a community where access to the internet is nearly a right, or should be. It should be a utility, but it's not. And so a lot of our students, you know, have no access to the internet other than through a hotspot that we provide. Are we saying don't use that hotspot to watch Netflix or what have you? I mean, that just reinforces, frankly, a discrimination. Because if your family has access to broadband internet, now you've got access to lots of stuff. And frankly, things that are amusement, entertainment can be very educational. At least can help build the whole student. So, yeah.
Is there any objection to leaving that sentence struck out in the policy from colleagues? So let's just, I think we're going to leave it
Okay.
out.
That's fine. Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, so have that sentence struck as originally presented. Thank you, Ms. Gaddis.
Thank you. So number 2 is being moved from policy 3013, employee acceptable use of electronic resources, which speaks to not endorsing or opposing referendum and the political motives of using technology. So that's just been moved. That was already in policy. That statement has just been moved over.
And that does not prevent the school system or anyone from educating the public about a bond referendum or elections. It's just not being partisan in a bond referendum or elections, is my understanding.
There can be educational components. Information
Correct.
It can be that if it's informational, but this I think hugs very, very tightly and accurately the law.
I mean, and I support that fully, but I know in the past when we've had a bond referendum as one example, we were able to educate the community about what the bond entails, what it includes, and how that funding is proposed to be spent. So I think that is something the school system has done responsibly in the past. But glad to see that the partisan nature is continued to be clear in policy. Is there any, Dr. Martin?
So I continue to raise questions somewhat related to the previous one. In principle, I agree with this statement completely. In practice, in the details, I have a little concern particularly about the network's use because, right, we don't want, you know, a employee or to use a computer to, you know, be a volunteer in somebody's campaign. Similarly, as a board member, none of us should use any Wake County device for our own campaign. That said, the network connection, I'm willing to bet that all of you have your personal cell phones to connect to the Lundberg network when you're here, probably rather than working on data. I think most teachers probably do that. I don't think most people really pay attention to what network their device is connected to. And so if someone is making very careful efforts to, you know, not use a systems device to carry out whatever activity, but they happen to be answering an email related to
Sure.
a topic, they're technically using the network. And again, this gets back to some of my concern with the previous one. Networks ought to be public. So, because internet is basically becoming ubiquitous and a utility. But to what extent are we adding language that is overly, frankly, unenforceable to a large degree. I mean, you could go back and you can dig into the network history and see, did you ever send a personal email from the Lundberg network? That's nuts. There's a big difference between that and using your computer to run your campaign, if that makes sense. So I wonder if at least we could strike network from that list, or if we could broaden that language, because what we don't want to do, I believe, is let statements in policy like this come across as really anti-democratic. Right? We say we want as part of our strategic plan, we want our students to be civically engaged. Well, how do you be civically engaged and follow this statement to the letter of the law?
I would say you have to use another network, and you have to separate your time. So
But how do you use another network all the time? I don't think almost anybody does that. And so here I'm getting back to, let's be smart, let's be real, let's pay attention to what the intent is, and not get caught in.
Other feedback from colleagues?
I also think that really only applies to 9 people, specifically to what you're talking about in the campaign piece. And if, just like it goes to, when you're talking about sharing your political views, you can have a bumper sticker if you're a teacher, but coming in with a "I support this candidate" shirt is not okay. But if you're a student, having that shirt is a different story.
That's a different issue than I think I raised, but.
Ms. Carter?
I hear your point, but I guess my concern about it is it's not only us at the table, but there are also folks in the schools that do help campaigns. And I think it's important, anything that can be seen as a Wake County, resource or something that is purchased by the county or paid for by the county, not to be used for campaign purposes is the only way I can think to put that. And that's the only.
Completely agree with that.
And so, but a network is paid for by, we pay.
We do.
Right? So that's where I think that's a little different to me is how I'm seeing it, if that makes.
So you're saying to remove networks?
No, I'm
No,
saying.
you're saying to keep it in, okay.
I
Okay,
guess,
I just wanted
from
to-
how I'm viewing it is, it's not, to me, not just specific to computers, but that it could be printing stuff, it could be taking sticky notes and using it for, making note, any resource, if that make, anything that Wake County Public School System pays for to be, and shouldn't be used in any way to help a campaign. I don't.
No, I agree with you.
And I know that's a hard line, but I think then we start crossing that because then, do we, what do we, I don't know. That's just my.
No, okay, so you would want to leave networks, the wording as it is?
Somehow, this is a text, so it can't really go into the other.
Correct.
I know that's
Yeah.
That's why it's a little more difficult because this is technology only, but for me, I see it as a overall bigger, if that.
Well, and if I can clarify,
Yeah.
I agree with that overall. I'm just suggesting that in the practicality, this network idea is a little bit like the cell phone and the discipline policy for years. I mean, when you go, my device connects to whatever internet signal gives the strongest signal wherever I am. Is it at home? Is it at NC State? Is it here? Is it at McDonald's? Is it downtown Raleigh? Right? It connects to the strongest signal. This language says that, wherever you are, you better check what network you're connected to before you respond to any other email on whatever your device is. That's what I'm suggesting is, it's a little bit like if we had multiple electric grids. Are you going to, if you charge your cell phone, your personal cell phone here at the table, technically Wake County Public Schools is paying for the electricity to charge that cell phone, right? I'm taking it to an extreme example here. What I'm suggesting is the network is closer to a utility No question about device use, no question about a lot of the details you're talking about. What I'm trying to make sure that our policies are 21st century relevant, and I actually think this detail is pushing rationality.
And I'm going to call on Ms. Cash and then Mr. Hegarty. And Ms. Cash is remote. Ms. Cash?
I just needed clarification from Marlo. The networks that are available on WCPSS facilities, and does this include schools, are
Yes,
either Lunenburg, which is password protected,
Or the WCPSS guest.
right?
Correct.
So devices that automatically seek Wi-Fi could possibly hook to WCPSS guest
Guest.
because it is not password protected, but you
Correct.
cannot hook up to Lunenburg unless you
Have
put
the
in a
password.
password, which is in. There's an active sort of confirmation of what you're doing, and therefore tacit, perhaps understanding and agreement to policies for Lunenburg.
Yes, and both networks are filtered the exact same way.
Okay.
Welcome.
Ms. Cash?
Hey, thank you so much. I couldn't get my hand up. I appreciate that. I just want to say that I do not think networks should be taken out. I think it should be left in. I'm not going to explain that. It's just my feeling. But thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cash. Mr. Hegarty?
So I have a question. Sorry. I have a question and a comment. Ms. Gaddis, can we audit the sites or places that people visit from our network?
We can pull sites. We don't actively look every day. You know, we don't have the staff to actively look each day to what people are doing, but if there is a question, it can be pulled, yes.
So someone could, through whatever kind of request or investigation, find out if there were inappropriate sites that were being
Correct.
used. Okay. So, I mean, on one hand, I think Dr. Martin brings up a perfectly valid point about enforceability and the incidental use that'll go on all the time. But then I also know that in state government and in the court system, at least, this was still the expectation in other units of government. I mean, you didn't dare play a game on your phone that could show up on the networks of the court system's, internet logs. And again, this was taxpayer-funded internet. It had to be used for business purposes. I don't know if they ever tracked it. I don't know if they ever audited it. But it was always the expectation that anything that could be a forbidden purpose, games, political stuff, anything like that was kept off the network. So I just bring that up for comparison.
Thank you. Any other feedback, Ms. Johnson-Osler?
I mean, I agree with Mr. Hegarty. That's the assumption for my agency that I've run as well, right? But we're not a school. We're actually not likely to hold people accountable unless it crashes a system, right? So even a unit of government, even if they're auditing it, you would know as an attorney, because it's accountability. So I guess my point is, I see why we're writing it. It's the accountability for something that is so easy to do. I think I was telling our IT guy, who keeps being very helpful to me, that I didn't realize that my phone was attached to Lunenburg until I was waiting in the parking lot at Millbrook to pick up my daughter. And I was like, this is really weird. My phone isn't on data. And when I looked, it just automatically was. So for me, I guess I'm going back to Dr. Martin's point. It is super easy for me as an adult. It's definitely going to be for a kid. There's no way that every single kid is looking at the device like, wait, let me see, because that's not how they use technology. And again, I'm always going to say this. We assume because kids are on their phone all the time that they have a keen sense of technology. I think our teachers can tell you that is not accurate. They know very little about how their technology actually works. We figured that out. They could barely find the calculator on a phone, right? They use the apps that they use, and that's really it. So again, I guess it's the concern for me that is not that it's here, because it's standard language that you see in every unit of government. The concern for me is, what does accountability look like for a kid who that really truly might be their only internet services when they're, especially if you live near a school, or you're at a rec center that's a joint use, where I assure you at Barwell Road, Lunenburg is coming on my phone because it's joint use and it's right there. So I guess I say that to say my concern is always going to be how do we make it positive, which Ms. Mahaffey talked about. Is that possible? Because I don't want us to then start getting a flurry of accountability, because we do know some of our folks, when we change a policy, the hammer comes down. And not in a negative way, but people strict rule followers do what the rules say. And we know that the discrepancy is large, far and wide. So I guess I don't know what the answer is. I'm just expressing the concerns that Dr. Martin's
And this is
already brought
not a change in policy, it's just moving 13.
Correct. This is same language from
It's the same
3013.
language.
Right, but we didn't have all this
But yeah,
technology
that's-
that we were
yes.
giving
Well,
our
and
students,
far
right?
more
That's the difference
sensitive.
now.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, that's a good point. So is there any suggestion from staff or council on how to navigate?
So I'd recommend leaving it in as a precaution. And I would note that this is not about just some incidental personal use, which is covered by the paragraph above. This is when you're engaged in the discrete activity of campaigning, which I think brings about a higher level of self-monitoring and scrutiny. And so I'm recommending that stay in. I think that, as always, this board manages to identify some amazing debates, and this is another one.
We are good at that.
And we are
I will
very
say,
good at
I will
that.
lift that up, yes. Okay, thank you, sir. So I've heard some wanting to leave it in, some wanting to take it out. Is there a formal motion, Dr. Martin, that you want to make to? Is there anyone else? I hear Dr. Martin saying to take it out.
I would like to
Mr.
strike it, recognizing that we only took pagers out of the policy, I think, 2 years ago.
It was 2 years ago, you are
Oh,
correct.
that's hilarious.
Dang
Yes.
it.
And like I say, I mean,
Okay.
all the issues that Ms. Carter raised, I agree with. Keeping campaigns separate, I agree with. There's a reason why I don't even use a Wake County computer. I use my own personal computer because
gonna
I
get to
can't
that.
keep everything separate, right?
too
I
hard.
can't do that. So I get it, and I completely support that. It's just networks are close to a utility. They should be a utility. That is my perspective. And as such, I think this is backwards.
And I heard Ms. Cash clearly wants to leave it in. Ms. Carter wants to leave it in. Or is there anyone else who wants to take it out? I just want some clarity. Ms. Johnson-Hostler wants to take it out. Anyone else
We're
wants
being
to take it out?
forward-thinking, Jim.
I guess if it came out, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I guess the counter is, what if someone is specifically using a network specifically for this purpose? Like they take their hotspots that they were provided, and then they take them to a campaign headquarters and they set it up to advocate for or against a candidate. I mean, that's blatant use of the network. Or would that be equipment?
No, that's a device.
Yeah,
That's not
that's
the
an actual
network. That's a
device.
device.
I agree with Jim.
So I'm in complete agreement. You can't do that,
Yeah.
right? Complete agreement. You can't do that. But that's a device. That's not a network.
But
It's actually both.
But I think that was my
It's actually
distinction
both.
for,
Yeah.
that's my distinction for government, right? Like, it's the device, there's no question, right? Because that's a very deliberate thing that you're doing. Network, to me, again, my opinion, doesn't feel as deliberate. And if we are saying that it is, then I'm with Jim. 2 years later, we're going to be back saying, oh, yeah, it's a utility, you're right. Well, at least that's what I'm hoping.
So I got two people.
But a
taking
device
out.
is different,
Trying to
but-
move us along.
Yeah.
Two people
Just
taking
me
out.
and Jim.
Anyone else?
I'm fine with that.
All right. So I'm afraid.
All right, so we're keeping.
Keeping it in.
Okay.
I don't hear anyone else saying to take it out.
I see the argument for, and I think, if it's one email, but I understand that there is ways to misuse it. But again, if it's your hotspot, that's a device and the network. If I'm sending an email real quick while I'm sitting here, before the meeting starts, what is that then? I guess that's, yeah. But I'm using the
No.
network.
You're
No,
on the
using
network.
So I'm sorry, do you want to take it out then, Ms. Kathy?
I think it's a really gray area, but again, if you're doing that all the time and you're posted up outside of a school, just sending emails,
Yeah.
then that's a different
I think it gets to
story.
Mr. Haggerty's point of expectation.
I'm just going to go back to my pager.
Okay. Me too. That was simple times. So still two to take it out. So I think it's left in. Thank you.
All right. So you'll notice
Thank you
that,
for the the discussion.
Absolutely.
colleagues.
Absolutely. So you're going to notice that the numbers are shifted now because we added that there. So we're going to be looking now at number 4, the new number 4. We added the requirement to follow the terms and conditions of district software subscriptions. This directly relates to COPA, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which imposes certain requirements on operators of websites for online services directly related to students under age 13. Number 5, you'll see we've added or intended to and likely to incite imminent unlawful action or otherwise prohibited by board policy. Again, some of that language has come from 3013, but is also applicable. And number 6, we added the first sentence. Sounds really simple, but users must not circumvent network security measures. That's important. Number 10, pardon me. Number 10, you'll see we struck out the last sentence, which is users must scan any downloaded files for viruses. That's similar to the pagers, right? So just to be clear, yeah, we'll leave that as that is. Number 15, you'll see that we struck out data systems, but we added technology resource because it's not just data systems. Our kids have access and our staff have lots of access to lots of different resources. In 16, we struck out system because most kids and most teachers don't know who the system administrator is of any particular application. So just find an administrator. It's like find an adult and tell them, right? So then on, let's see, where are we next? Number 19, we've added students may not access chat rooms unless assigned by a teacher or administrator for a valid educational purpose. All right, we're moving on to C. Restricted material on the internet, similar to the pagers language, and in fact, this is actually where this pagers were at one point in time, Dr. Martin. We struck out telephone, and we struck out 3G and 4G, and just said mobile technology and hotspots.
And is hotspot generic enough?
It is for right now, yes. I'll come back to you at some point in time when it is something else fancy. How about that?
Well, and herein, I would suggest we even strike hotspot because I don't think we need the EG. I think we're just saying the personal mobile technology, period.
Yeah, I think that.
Happy to do that.
Let's do that. Good.
Awesome.
Because it will be a pager.
Yes.
I'm convinced.
So just end the sentence at mobile technology. Thank you, Dr.
Yes, got it.
And I think since it says personal, I don't know many people that have their own personal hotspot unless it's their
It's on your phone, yes. Yes, absolutely. Anymore, yes. We still have some who have them, I'll just say. That's okay, though. All right, under D, parental consent, you'll see we've added third-party accounts. So the district provides specific resources for students that meet specific requirements around data privacy and security. These resources are listed in the digital resource product library and are covered under the policy. If there's a product not provided by the district, parental consent would be required. All right, now under E, get my stuff together here. E, that's where a large chunk has been added, you'll notice. So at the end of the last sentence of the first paragraph matches the earlier piece around may monitor. So we may monitor online activities who are accessing the internet via a school-owned device. There is not somebody sitting on the other end of my network making sure that we know who's using what and how. So it's really more of a may. And then you'll see in here the language around the shared responsibility of monitoring and supervising our students at school for us and at home, parents and guardians. It is a shared responsibility in that work. And so just being clear about that.
Ms. Mahaffey.
So,
And then Mr. Hagerty.
Ms. Gaddis, what would be an instance where a network activity would be monitored under that may? I mean, because it isn't someone 24/7 or pulling an audit every so often. I'm just curious.
Sure. Often it's because of either we've had a discipline issue and we have to go back and review. HR may contact us if there has been a question under employee relations, or we may see some network activity on a particular nefarious site that that may pop up as it's being hit regularly, and we may have to take a look at that point in time. But outside of that, that's really more of our May monitoring. We also have, we're also using a couple systems that run dashboards, but it's not one of those things, again, that I'm looking at Ms. Mahaffey every day, every second. If there is something that's shared inappropriately, meaning we're sharing student data outside of the district, we're able to quickly rectify that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, thank you, Ms. Gaddison. This is an issue we've actually talked about.
We have at length, yes,
And
sir.
so I'm going to be repeating things that you know, but for the benefit of the board, they may not have heard. So if we take this policy that internet use and monitoring use is a shared responsibility between districts and parents, we have to give people, I guess, the tools or the freedom to be able to assume this mantle of responsibility, or at the very least, we should make sure we're not prohibiting their ability to do this. And so, as you know, I've had parents in my district that have been interested in content blocking or website blocking. And the scenario is that students get school technology. They use the school technology to access either inappropriate material, maybe it's an appropriate website, but that it's being used inappropriately, or it's something that we might find appropriate, but the parents have an objection to. There's a whole spectrum of where this could be. And so, if we're putting it on the parents to also monitor and also be responsible for the content and the use of the device, I know that we have some obstacles where parents can't put certain content blockers or website monitors on the systems. How do we manage that and reconcile that?
Sure. So I think in the situation that you and I have discussed, there was a lot of question about Google's Family Link. And unfortunately, because we manage all Chromebooks through a workspace for education, Google does not allow that to be on our Chromebooks. So it automatically disables, which, if Google's listening and would like to enable that, I'm all for it, right? However, we have worked with parents one-on-one, as I have with some of your folks, to find some other solutions to help them in those situations. And if a family needs that additional support, all they have to do is contact the help desk or contact me directly, and we usually work through that.
And I appreciate that. I really appreciate all the individual attention you gave to those families that reached out. I just want to make sure that by policy, we're not putting something on parents and citizens that then they are not empowered to actually do. Whether, in this case, it was the Google Family. I don't know if there's other situations where, they can't put on other, internet limiting. There's certain products that will limit the amount of time or the hours, that students can use the devices. I just want to make sure that we have given them what they need to monitor it on their end too, and whatever we can do to facilitate that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Any other, Ms.
I actually just have a follow-up that I hadn't thought about, so I'm glad you repeated that, because I haven't been sending parents to you. I've been telling them, based on their home internet provider, how to set but again, back to our early conversation that Jim started, for families that don't have that, then I'm assuming there is no way for them to do that other than call you. Most of the parents that I've talked to, most of them had Spectrum, so I knew exactly how to tell them to go in and set up those. Because again, it's the internet provider that they are using that allows you to do it, not the actual device. So my question is always going to be, what does advocacy look like to make those changes? Because that is a problem for families who don't have a personal home internet service provider where they can actually shut down the internet versus do anything with the device controls.
Sure. So as Mr. Haggerty mentioned, monitoring of your children and what you allow and don't allow is very personal to a family. And we have to balance that also with the access to resources that our teachers may use in the classroom. So that is why, in general, we've worked with families individually, because some really want it locked down, some really don't. And there is a wide variety of information in between. So yes, we do recommend sometimes using the ISP. We also have families who have specific appliances in their home that are filtering or monitoring. There's a wide variety of those. We don't recommend any of those because we don't service or support them, but there are lots out there. And then, of course, we also have a couple other solutions internally that we can help parents with if we need to.
So yes, I got that. But I guess my question is, why wouldn't we put that in our family engagement training for parents, right? Like, just making sure they have options versus a lot of individual TA, which we appreciate it because you work really hard for us as board members too. But I guess I'm just trying to figure out how could we not just institutionalize.
I think that's a great point, and I'll take that back to the team, and we will look at including some of that. You're welcome.
Thank you for raising it.
All right, we ready to move on? All right, the last one is under H, and this is another move from policy 3013, which is the warranty, that basically just says, we are not responsible for the internet as far as what the accuracy of information is on the internet. So not really, no.
Good to be clear.
Yes, just to be clear on that one.
Okay.
So, and those are the changes for the policy.
So in H, I think it needs to be including but not limited to, rather than including but limited to.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for catching that. All right, any other questions for the policy?
Just really quickly, as we're looking at updates and technology, looking at the new section 7, internet-based file sharing program designed to facilitate sharing of copyrighted material. Now, I know back in the age of dinosaurs, we might have thought that was like Napster or something like that. What is that today? And I mean, that's not going to prohibit Dropbox or anything like that, is it?
It can. Well, first of all, Dropbox isn't an approved resource.
Okay.
The district.
There you go.
But we have Google, we have Microsoft 365. Really, it's really about, and we do get these calls fairly regularly, where somebody has gotten a resource, made a photocopy, gotten something off of Teachers Pay Teachers that was copyrighted, they've posted it on their website, and then we get the cease and assist order.
The
right?
emphasis in number 7 is the copyrighted material
Correct.
piece.
That is the big piece.
And would that be copyrighted material shared inappropriately, or? I mean,
It almost always is, it's not supposed to be shared, period.
Okay.
And it has been posted.
So so then is it really install or use any internet-based file sharing program to facilitate sharing of copyrighted material, or users may not use school-based equipment, devices, networks to improperly facilitate sharing of copyright material.
I think that's a great
I
distinction.
mean, just don't use these devices to share copyrighted material.
Does anyone object to changing the language so that it emphasizes sharing copyrighted material? I think that's a great point. Any objections to that? Okay, so we're.
And I trust your drafting on that entirely.
Good thing, because I'll probably redraft it about 4 times. So we'll get it, though, but I've got it. All right,
So
thank you.
looking over the changes, we're going to leave in, we're going to continue to strike through that sentence in B, student personal use. We're going to keep that struck. We're leaving networks in section number 2. We're changing the language in 7 to focus on the not sharing copyrighted material.
Correct.
And
We're striking phone.
Telephone, and we're ending
And
that
hotspots.
sentence in C and striking hotspot.
Correct.
Were there any other?
And I have a to-do for the family engagement strategies.
Yes, and we're inserting not limited to in the warranty language.
Perfect.
Okay, was there anything else that you need from us?
Not on the policy, no.
Okay, all right, so there is a recommendation, and that committee approval be, that we approve this to move it to an action meeting in July or August? Is there a motion to that effect?
Motion to move to action?
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries, and this will go to the full board for action. Thank you for addressing those concerns, and I'm sure we'll have 2 readings on it, so we'll have chances to reflect on those changes, and as well as the full policy. And so next, Ms. Gaddis is going to go over the RNP. This is not to be approved by the board, but she's going to highlight some of the issues, and particularly, with technology and responsible use, I think I would welcome council giving us some overview at some point on the recent Supreme Court decision about student speech. And I think that's what I thought of when I was looking through the RNP, that we have to, I like the fact that you are maintaining our responsibility to monitor the conduct of this use of technology, because free speech doesn't equal bullying. It shouldn't. So, with the eye to our anti-bullying efforts, I appreciated the language in this RNP, and that's just me speaking as one board member. So with that, I'm going to let you continue.
All right. So as we prepare for a full student device program for 2021-2022, let me get my numbers right, it's important that we match our expectations for devices with policies. So you're going to see quite a bit of editing in this RNP. You'll notice that the old Section A has been struck out. About 7 or 8 years ago, right as I came to Wake County, the district moved from an opt-out policy to an opt-in policy with technology. And with the increased expectations of the technology in schools, we are actually moving back to an opt-out policy. Now, this is being struck now, but we already have things in our handbook, and we already have forms that have already gone out to families. So this particular piece of the policy in Section A will be looked at for next school year in 2022-2023. Does that make sense? All right. So then you'll see in new Section A speaks to our identity management process that we call Wake ID. Changes here are just simple language shifts. So there's nothing from a content perspective that has changed in A. In B, under laptops and other devices, at the end of the first paragraph, second sentence, you'll see for approved educational uses. In that, it mirrors the last policy. Then you'll notice below that, paragraph 3 mirrors new language in the student device program parent-student agreement form and the terms and conditions of use document, both of which are now found on the Guides for Technology website for parents and students. These are required documents for 21-22. And it really speaks again to the monitoring, maintenance, and shared expectations of parents, guardians, and staff. All right. Behind that, you'll see that students are going to be permitted but not required to use a personal device instead of our device. We realize that some families would prefer to provide their own device. There are directions here on what should be provided if that is the case, and expectations for who is going to troubleshoot, fix, and replace when things are broken.
I just have a question for clarification. In how I'm reading it, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, or clarify, for page number 2, where it's talking about the type of device, if they use a personal device, so they are not allowed, is that correct, to bring a tablet?
Correct.
Is it only a laptop, so no phones anymore?
Well, phones should never be a student's only device.
Okay.
They can still use their phones. But as far as what the device is that they're using every day in class, should not be a phone. Okay. They can still have their phones. To Dr. Martin's point about what devices are allowed. Right. This is really about doing schoolwork and understanding what access. A lot of our resources have better, and our kids will tell you this first and foremost. In fact, we learned this early on with iPads with some of our older kids, is that they just couldn't do what our resources needed them to do. So what we're talking about here is just making sure you have a laptop. It can be a Chromebook, a Windows machine, a Mac. And it needs to have the latest operating system, a keyboard, camera, and mic. We have not given specifics, but a Kindle does not qualify, nor does an iPad or a phone for your only device.
And if the family cannot meet these provisions, they will be given a Wake County.
Everybody is given one regardless, unless they opt out of it.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I just would ask that we work really hard to make sure families are aware of that, because to me that is a change coming from this. I mean, I've seen plenty of students repeatedly, the phone is their
Yeah.
device or an iPad or, some other tablet. So if we are changing that,
They can still use their own personal devices at home. What we're talking about is their main computer for schoolwork. We are providing, by August, actually by September of this year, every student will have a device. So we have enough devices now to give every student a device. So there is no more reliance upon families to provide their own. However, we do know some families would prefer to provide their own. And that's what we're talking to.
And I do think that for those families who wish to provide their own, for their understanding of what they should purchase for their child, it needs to be communicated.
Correct. Yes. Yes, and that is in the device agreements and everything else as well, and on the website. Yes, sorry, my apologies.
Any other concerns, Ms. Carter? You're okay. Ms. Mahaffey, and then Dr. Martin.
I just had a formatting question on the list of what's needed, because laptop, latest operating system, camera, keyboard, microphone are listed out. I mean, I put them all together, but, should be a laptop with a updated operating system that also has a keyboard, camera, and microphone. May be a
Happy
little
to do
less
that, yeah.
confusing for, I think.
I left my operating system at all.
Great point.
My copy of Windows 95 is still in the basement. No.
Yeah, I'm still giving up Windows 7. That's all right.
So my question really is the same as Ms. Carter's. I think, and I understand the answer, but I think the language needs to be adapted a little bit, because this implies that students are only permitted to use whatever these other devices are. And what I heard from you is you can use other things, but you must have access to something that has a true monitor, a true keyboard, and so on, which I'm in complete agreement with, because you can't really type an essay effectively on your phone. But this language doesn't differentiate the sort of working device from any device. There are people who like to take notes on a tablet, for example. I don't think we're saying that that's not allowed.
Correct.
It's just that does not replace a device to do actual work.
So if I were to change that to students will be provided a district-owned device, but are permitted to use a personal device instead of a district student device.
How about something like an equivalent personal device, right? Because a tablet is not an equivalent device to a system with a keyboard. And that's the expectation, that they will have a device equivalent to this.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's a distinction, right? Because like the advertisements you see for the Microsoft Surface say it's everything a laptop can do, and it's got all the things. So someone may buy that, but it's a tablet. I know, right?
Surfaces
Like, so
make
there
it
we
really
go.
difficult
Yeah.
because they have a full Windows operating system. So Surfaces are a little bit different.
So, Dr. Martin, I'm just saying, I just want to make sure that I capture where you were talking about. So at the top of the second page.
Top of the second
Yes.
page.
Students are permitted but not required to use an equivalent personal device. Is that where you were talking about putting equivalent, or?
I
Somewhere
think,
further.
I think the, yeah, I mean, something to that order. Students are permitted to use, are permitted but not required to use a personal device equivalent to the district's provided device, something on that order.
Could we just say laptop?
But then
instead
we
of
have to
device?
define what is the district's provided device, which is a device that has the monitor, screen, keyboard, et cetera.
So a point of clarification, I want to make sure I understand. We're not talking about somebody who wants to bring in their iPad in addition to, we're talking about somebody who wants to bring an iPad instead of.
That's my understanding.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that, because the way I think I originally had it is not that way, so I want to make sure.
The implication here is you can't have a tablet at all, currently as written.
If it's your only device, correct?
It doesn't even say only device, though.
Yeah, that's why I added the sentence at the
understand
top.
the
Yeah,
intent.
yeah.
I'm hearing
Perfect.
these two, so we want to make sure that students have a Wake County device or an equivalent that has these parameters, and we somehow also want to acknowledge that they can bring a tablet
And that's still in policy under personal devices,
And
under
have some-
3225.
They prefer to take notes on their phone because kids can do that. And maybe they can do that. They just have to make sure that when the teacher or when their instructor or educator needs them to have this baseline, that they have access to
And-
that baseline device.
And in policy 3225 that we just left, there is a whole paragraph on personal devices. This is speaking specifically to those who do not want to bring their own.
And this is the R&P.
This is the
There's
RNP.
Everyone,
Correct.
Mr. Hager.
And this is just a due diligence question for Mr. Blumberg. At the bottom of page 1, when they're talking about privacy on devices, there's volumes of books about student searches and what's reasonable expectation of privacy and back and forth. I just want to make sure that this meets your review and this is all fine, that we can,
Good question, yes.
okay.
And just,
Barrington Smith has reviewed both RNP and the policy. So
yes, and the
thank you
terms
for
and
raising it.
conditions speak specifically to searches of district devices and personal devices and what's allowed.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And y'all, we're not going to get through everything if we're at this rate, so I'm just saying. So any other concerns about this piece? Ms. Gaddis, continue. Thank you.
All right. Under C, we added with the approval of an authorized Wake County teacher or administrator before the first sentence. So you should be using web-based applications that your teachers tell you or your administrators tell you to use. Then, as per Ms. Kushner and her suggestion, which was a fantastic one, we took out the names of particular products and just put general learning management systems and productivity tools and email, rather than having specific products that we would have to revise constantly. We also added here that we have a review process for web applications, and approved applications must have acceptable security and privacy practices, and staff and students should only use applications that have been approved. The last thing here on that section is that we struck out Google Apps. First of all, Google has changed the name 3 times since this policy has come through. But second of all, with the use of Chromebooks, all students are required to have Google access. However, elementary students do not have to have email, as we use Outlook for that, and principals still can request that if needed. All right, in D, under D, we have the safe and appropriate use of technology and the internet. We added some language about our new internet filter and the fact that they are being filtered both at school now and home the same way. It's not different, it's the same. And you'll see that it also, just because they're filtered does not mean that we're not all responsible, both us and families, for making sure that we're monitoring, which matches that policy language before. And then under E, privacy, because we moved most of the information under privacy in other sections, this got narrowed down to a very, very short little paragraph that just speaks to the fact that anything stored on ours will be consistent with applicable law.
Thank you.
And that is RNP.
Okay. Any other feedback on RMP? Again, this doesn't need board approval, but as I do appreciate the feedback that we've been able to give you on this
Absolutely.
specific, because we get a lot of questions from families and students specifically on these issues. Any other feedback from Ms. Gaddis? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Move on to the next piece. All right, getting ready for the school year. And so the next policy is attendance. Policy 4400. Mr. Coe is back. There were concerns that, as we did approve this policy in June, earlier this month rather, there were some concerns that he's coming back to clarify. Mr. Coe.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Kushner, Superintendent Moore, and board members. We bring to you additional revisions from our favorite policy, Policy 4400, attendance. As you may recall, we brought to you the revisions necessary for the start of the 21-22 school year that were reviewed at the April 27th and May 19th policy committee meetings, as well as our June 15th board meeting. And as a continuing review of Policy 4400 attendance, we bring you suggested revisions to address a specific point brought up at the June 15th board meeting. For students who may need to be picked up from school early due to their siblings being ill, we added revised language in Section C, late arrivals and early departures, noting the language For students who have been in attendance for at least one half of the instructional day, early departures may also be excused at the discretion of the principal if necessary for reasons related to medical or health concerns of siblings or other family members. And then also in Section D, excused absences, we also added the language after the first paragraph noting the school principal determines whether a submitted medical statement is sufficient to excuse a student's absence. And this revision was added at the request of the board to provide principal oversight of medical notes. So committee approval of these revisions is requested, and I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. So this policy, just correct me if I'm wrong, just to keep up, it was approved on first reading, and so it will go to second reading with these specific revisions?
No, it's already been approved in full. These were some follow-up items that were still out there, some loose chat, so to speak, and so they're just following up that stuff. Yeah, sure.
Following the bouncing ball with attendance policy. Okay.
So, Jonathan, per our recent practice, would this come back for approval on first reading as a technical correction?
This would not be. This would come back. These are, some substantive
For first
changes.
and second,
First
then.
and second reading,
Okay.
unless the board elects to waive second reading.
Okay,
And
got it.
I do have a comment from Ms. Cash. She's appreciative of this additional language. So I know she had raised concerns. She was one board member that raised concerns and appreciates the additional language. Thank you, Mr. Coe. So any other feedback? And I think you've captured some of the concerns that were raised. Or any concern, Ms. Carter?
Well, I guess would the principal being able to determine whether a submitted medical statement is sufficient, I guess, I have some concern around that. I mean, what would be, I guess if I'm reading that as a parent, I'm thinking, but I have a doctor's note, right? And so at what point would a principal be able to override a doctor's note?
I think.
I know there was discussion around quarantine, but then that was brought up that that's a separate issue that's, being handled separately. But I guess I'm trying to get clarification.
Yeah, Ms. Carter, thanks for that point of clarification. I think from my understanding, it was that we wanted to make sure that whether it was a doctor's note or a note from the parent, that the principal had the discretion to assess, what was a valid enough reason to make sure that we can excuse families. So that I think it was the pursuit was more for flexibility rather than tightness, so that families can work with the school to make sure that, excused absences can be documented appropriately.
Is that for the family where the kid is out sick for the week and someone asks, how are you feeling? Are you better? Yeah, I went to Disney.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the examples, but the other one was like, is it okay enough if like a parent has a note that's even maybe not a doctor's note? And
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So medical statement here doesn't mean note from a doctor.
Right.
It means a statement that says that there was a medical issue.
Yes.
And the principal has the discretion to determine that that is sufficient, as opposed to requesting it specifically from a physician. Is that what you're saying? That this means?
Yeah, that would
Yes.
help in clarification, because a medical statement, that could be from anyone. I read that, and to me, I go to a medical profession. But if that means anyone can write it, that's a total different.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not going to recap my high school experience with me and my girlfriends. But, I'm not going to say anything about it. But so it's not a medical statement. It's not presumed to be from a physician,
Yes.
or a medical professional. Thank you. I hope that allays some concerns, Ms. Carter. Any other feedback? All right, so we do need board action to move this to the action meeting. So, we need committee action to move this to go to the board for first and second reading.
So, Madam Chair, I'd move that the committee recommend this to the board for first and second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Hegarty. Motion by Mr. Hegarty. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second from Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Any further discussion? Thank you for helping me catch up time, Mr. Cove. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir, for your persistence on this. I think we made it better policy, so that's always appreciated. Thank
Yes, ma'am. I believe I'm still here for the next one, Ms.
All
Kushner.
right. Moving on to the next two policies, 6120, Student Health Services, and 1610, Professional Learning. And I see Ms. Montfort here as well. Thank you for joining us. So we'll tackle Student Health Services first.
Yeah, good afternoon again. So at first, we're going to bring you both revisions to Policy 6120, Student Health Services, and Policy 1610-7800 in alignment with our School Mental Health Improvement Plan per State Board Policy SHLT 003. So first, for Policy 6120, we added Section B. We created new Section A and added Section B to note school system mental health plan with the language that reads, the superintendent shall develop a school-based mental health plan that includes a mental health training program and suicide risk referral protocol that satisfies the requirements of State Board Education Policy SHLT 003. The superintendent shall submit the plan to the board for approval and direct implementation of the plan within all applicable deadlines. And then the second section that we added was by September 15th of each year, the superintendent shall report to the Department of Public Instruction on 1, the content of the school system's mental health plan, including the mental health training program and suicide risk protocol, and 2, the school system's prior school year compliance with the requirements of State Board of Education Policy SHLT 003. And the board will review the components of the school system's mental health plan at least every 5 years, starting August 1st, 2025, and will update the mental health plan in accordance with any updated requirements provided by the State Board of Education. And with this policy, committee approval of these revisions is requested, and I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions or discussion.
Mr. Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I want to applaud the work that you've done on this, Mr. Coe and your team. This is something that I've been looking for since coming to the board, and this actually saves me a lot of time. I have here on my laptop where I had the State Board policy and different drafts of what different districts have done in North Carolina and elsewhere, trying to see what a model student mental health policy could look like. This isn't exactly the form that I'd envisioned, but it captures all of the important work that you're doing and all of the important things that need to be addressed in a student mental health policy. So I'm very happy to see this. I support what you've done here in both this section and then looking ahead to 6120, and then the other one.
Yeah, 1610, I believe. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'd open it up for, if I don't want to cut off discussion, but if you need a motion, I would move that we move ahead with first and second reading on this at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. I'm having to take a second and we can continue discussion. There's a second.
Sure, I'll second.
All right, thank you, Dr. Martin, the second. And so, but I assume there's further discussion. And I agree with Mr. Haggerty that I particularly like that it's both mental and physical health are in the same policy, that they're not separated. Thank you. Is there further feedback?
All right, so part 2 of this agenda item.
Yeah, we've got a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and move it
Doing good,
forward to the
man.
action. He's on roll.
Jumping
He's
ahead.
ready to go. Is there any further discussion with that? Take a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So this 6120 policy on student health services will be moved to the full board for action. Thank you, Mr. Coe.
So thank you for that, and sorry for the interruption on the vote. Next, for Policy 1610-7800, under Section A, professional learning, we added the following revision in the second paragraph to now read, professional learning must be provided at the system and school level on the effective delivery of the required curriculum per GS 115C-81.45D and 81.20F, and must also include a mental health training program, which includes all components required by, you see the statutes before you, and State Board Education Policy SHLT 003. And so before we move to discussion, I just wanted to let you all know that within professional learning, some of the examples of the sessions we provide that are aligned to this policy that we currently have in place are sessions such as crisis prevention, intervention training, threat assessment protocol, our community resiliency model, restorative practices, funny tummy feelings, second step, healthful living curriculum, our human trafficking lessons at the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, staff awareness for all WCPSS employees that covers SL 2019-245, human trafficking safety, risks, warning signs, risk factors for students, et cetera, and also our student, family, and staff wellness and SEL sessions, along with our employee assistance program. And some of the examples of the sessions that we are improving or developing further are our annual review of crisis intervention, discipline and SEL health, our student attendance and engagement, our telehealth services. We're researching platforms for our student support services staff. So those are just some of the examples, and so we're requesting committee approval of this upgrade for this professional learning policy. And I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Ketto. Any feedback or discussion on the proposed policy revisions? Oh, yes, Ms. Mahaffey.
I just have a question with the required trainings that came forward from the General Assembly. How is that tracked for our staff members?
So we have a training the trainer approach where our crisis prevention team, led by Kelly Lister, will work with our student support services staff, who will then go train these mandated trainings at the school level to make sure that everyone is in compliance. And then we track that centrally to make sure all the trainings have been completed by the designated dates.
Okay, so it's that rather than here's a training module that you have to take.
Yeah, so it's not asynchronous I mean, some of them might be. I would have to give you do more research to give you a maybe session by session. But our approach to some of those mandated trainings, Ms. Johnson-Hostler was at some of our planning sessions. We noted the importance of holding those discussions in person because of the sensitive nature and possible triggering effects of the discussions that we have. So we just made sure that a lot of those trainings that have that sensitivity were held in person by our trained staff, and were guided by Kelly Lister's team.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. Any other feedback or discussion? With that, I'll entertain a motion to move policy 1610/7800 professional learning to the board.
So moved.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Second.
Hegarty. There's a motion, Mr. Hegarty, second from Ms. Mahaffey. Any further discussion or questions? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries. So 1610, professional learning will also move to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right, so the last, thank you guys, we sped up. I'm quite thrilled. So our final item is to discuss the proposed equity policy, and we're not taking action on this policy. It will be new policy 1150, but just to discuss having the policy and going forward. Dr. Trice is here to give us an overview.
So thank you, Chair Kushner and members of the board, Superintendent Moore. Yes, so the administration is here, and you have before you a draft of the equity policy we presented at your last meeting. We're here to take direction from the board concerning adoption of a policy and perhaps change in language of the policy. So I'll turn it over to you, and we'll be happy to capture any thoughts and sentiments of the board.
Thank you, Dr. Trice. And also in Assembly, you've got copies of the policies from the Arlington Public Schools. I'm assuming that's Arlington, Virginia.
Yes.
Public Schools, as well as Orange County.
Orange County schools.
Here in North Carolina, as also examples of equity policy. So with that, I will simply open in saying that I am I think at this particular time, coming off the unprecedented year that we've had, and I think unprecedented is still the word to use, and the polarization that we've seen in the last year, that having a clear statement in policy as a governing board on equity is necessary. So I want to work with colleagues to formulate and pass policy. Again, I think it needs to be a consensus work of the full board, and I hope we can have a fuller discussion today than we did in May, given the time constraints. So with that, I'd love to hear from colleagues on both this general issues as well as any specific feedback you have. Ms. Scott.
Thank you. So I'll just start by sharing a general comment that I absolutely believe it is important to have this policy. I think, unfortunately, sometimes people hear equity and they might confuse that with equal, I've heard people say, well, there are no equal outcomes in life, and there's many different things that contribute to that, and I think it's important that when that is brought up, because of either brought up in bad faith or brought up because someone truly doesn't understand what equity means, that this is about providing opportunity for all of our students and the commitment to addressing any sort of barriers that may be in place that have prevented that from occurring. And I think it's important to have this written, to have this in place, but also to help educate people who bring up that concern. It's not about taking away from anyone. This is about providing opportunity. So I wanted to say that I hear that argument from folks, and that's not what this is about.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Ms. Carter.
I guess kind of circling back to what several folks brought up, concern around the definition, and I think I still share that concern. I know there were multiple kind of ideas thrown out. I don't see anything reflected here to capture that. But I think that, for me, start, getting that kind of more, aligned with what folks have brought up would be an important kind of, first, or one of the first steps I see. I mean, I know there were several ideas thrown out before, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that it's important to have a clear definition, because we are making a statement in policy that, to be transparent, to communicate to families. I think it's important for us to be as inclusive as we can. So thank you for that feedback, Ms. Carter. Ms. Mahaffey.
I did appreciate seeing the policies from the other districts, just to compare and to see what others are doing. So thank you for sharing that. And I appreciated reading through, in Arlington's point, they said the definition of equity is constantly evolving. And I think it has in time as we understand it more. I also appreciated how Orange County kind of pulled out a little more, and that definition wasn't just one paragraph, but it was a little more, including some examples. And their first piece on, I know we're just having this conversation, right? Their first piece under mission, recognizing that intolerant behavior can jeopardize safety, well-being, and learning of others, I think was really important, because I think a school is a place where everyone should feel safe, and I think that lifting that up is, I appreciated seeing that in their policy.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. So I struggle with this because I think it is absolutely critical that equity be the lens through which our strategic plan, what we do, our mission and vision is clearly focused. We have lots of examples of inequity across our system, and we need to work at addressing that, whether it be race or whether it be facility buildings, whether it be textbooks or computers or network access, or, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So I am absolutely committed that equity needs to be a lens through which we view our work. I mean, that really is the purpose of public school in the first place. To date, I believe, our current approaches toward education, I believe, have shifted very strongly in the direction that, the purpose of education is to make me or my children competitive, to get to this university, to get this job. We've transformed education into an individual mindset. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of individual benefit to education. But the purpose of public education, particularly in a democracy, is the us, not the me. And equity is the us. So I cannot be more clear in my saying that I believe equity must be the lens for how we operate as a public education system. That said, I really don't support an equity policy. Policy is a governing document, and I don't know how you govern equity. Because what you're going to consider equity is going to be different than what I'm going to consider equity, is going to be different than somebody else is going to consider equity. Look, for example, at the challenges we have with our discrimination and harassment and bullying policy. Right? There are clear legal definitions for harassment and bullying that require action. And generally, in my mind anyway, policy is dealing with actionable stuff. So, right, when there is bullying that doesn't meet an actionable threshold, we still have to address it. That's a cultural, it's a vision, it's a how do we operate kind of thing. But the reason we really have to have a bullying policy is because there is a threshold where specific actions are required. I'm having a hard time seeing how we craft equity into that context. I think when we look at the principles, we look at the what we need to do, we need to read every statement through the lens of, okay, how's it going to be used against the system to say you're not being equitable? It's going to happen, folks, just like already happens with a lot of our other policies. There was a committee put together back in 2010-11 to start working on this, and I was on that committee. And we started out with policy that didn't look a whole lot different than some of what's here. And the list becomes very long when you start thinking about all the areas of inequity that we potentially need to address. And then you ask, okay, how can I require that? What would be different if we had a policy, if we didn't have a policy? And all of a sudden, it becomes really pretty daunting, particularly given that we don't have budgets to address the very things that cause a lot of inequity. We can't even talk about whether a hotspot can be used for a kid to watch Netflix, right? That's an equity issue, right? So what becomes enforceable out of a policy? What are we going to do different if there's a policy in place that we wouldn't do if there was? We talk about differential resourcing. Absolutely critical if there's going to be equity. There is nothing, folks, that stops us from doing differential resourcing today. Nothing. Except that we don't do it. So policy in place, then there's going to be differential resourcing for what? For this, for that? How are we going to make those decisions? So again, don't get me wrong. This is work that absolutely needs to be done. But I very strongly believe that this needs to be the core focus of our mission, our vision, our strategic plan. And I just don't see how it turns into policy. I mean, we've had this discussion before, and we say, well, we can have a policy statement. Yes, we can have a policy statement. I agree, it's possible. But it feels very much to me that the purpose of having a policy is so that we feel good because we have an equity policy. And I want to know what we're going to do different if we have a policy. I would like to see it in our strategic plan, and right now, I really have a hard time supporting this becoming a policy. Thank you.
But it's about accountability, too. I mean,
So is our strategic plan, or should be.
Well, and I think there's room, I think, to have accountability and in a policy. Ms. Cash has been waiting, and I want to make sure, given that she's virtual, Ms. Cash, you can unmute.
Oh, no, actually, thank you so much. I'm not, I love the discussion. So, Dr. Martin, I understand what you're saying. I appreciate that. You know, I do want to say, and I won't be on this very long, I have another engagement, but I do agree that I do agree about two things, that it is not about taking away, but giving back. And I also agree that an equity policy is probably very important, but I also hear Dr. Martin's suggestions, which is new that I have not heard, and I appreciate that as well. I want us to address this equities in a successful way, that it will be bought into. I know that I sent most of you my one comment about this policy was in the definition. I wanted to take out a piece where we didn't actually talk about the gaps between the lowest and highest performing students as part of the policy. And I know that maybe all of you have read that. So my suggestion for the policy, which may be just mute at this point, because I think we're talking about whether we want a policy or not, that in the definition that the educational equity is defined as raising the achievement of all students and eliminating the racial or cultural predictability, and the rest of that sentence. So that is my only input on this. So thank you, Ms. Kushner, for letting me say that.
Thank you, Ms. Cash, and I will forward that email. I just saw it. I'm sorry. I meant to mention, I will forward that to Dr. Trice and his team.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. He's already got it. See, superintendent's on it. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cash.
Thank you.
Mr. Hegarty.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So there are questions, and I hear them about why have an equity policy versus incorporating equity in the strategic plan and incorporating it all of our work. And I think, those are valid questions and concerns. I think I look at it from the perspective of when we talk about equity, having a written definition in policy in place, I believe is crucial, because I think right now many different people through our district hear the word equity and it means very different things to many different people. And I'm going to be a little critical here, but what happens is that sometimes a lot of parents in a lot of schools will get told no about something they want to do, and the excuse that they're given is equity. You can't have cupcakes in classroom. Why? Because of equity. You can't have a strings program at your school. Why? Because of equity. And it's just, tossed around, and people don't know. I don't know that we use it consistently to mean what is said in this policy and about the important work that is defined here. Raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and highest performing students, and eliminating the racial and cultural predictability and disproportionality of which student groups occupy the highest and lowest achievement categories. I think it's a term that gets a lot of misuse. I think what you've done here in Section C in the commitment to equity is fantastic. I think that gives clear direction. I think that helps us explain to people, to parents, to reporters, to anyone what the equity policy is all about and what our equity work is about. So I think there's value and importance in that. I will say that as we look at an equity policy and you lay out these principles of equity, here I approach it differently. And as I've looked at some other equity policies, when they talk about principles of equity, one of the first principles that I usually see stated talks about clarity in language. Clarity in language, goals, and measures. And I think that's important because in order to have a conversation where we all come together and meet in the same place about expectations and what we want to do, we have to use that clear common language. So, I see principles of equity being more along the lines of some of the things that were in C and some of the things that were in the definition. Here, where we have the principles of equity, and you talk about we require all educators to be guided by the following principles of equity, these seem more like instructional methods or methodologies rather than what I would call like a principle or a value. And then the second thing is, and I'll bring this up. I think some of the language in these principles is subject to multiple meanings or multiple interpretations, or at the very least, may not be understood the same way by all audiences. And so before we vote on an equity policy, I do have thoughts, would like to see some more discussion about Section B and the principles of equity, maybe more along the lines of this idea of clarity in language, clarity in goals, and making sure that everybody, again, that's what we're trying to do, right? Make sure that everyone can understand what these principles are and what it's all about, and there's no ambiguity there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, and again, thank you for bringing this back to us. Hopefully, we will get to this. I mean, I certainly will echo sentiments that were made last time. Again, for the sake of revisiting this conversation, I do feel strongly that we have a policy. One of the things that many of us have said at this table is our policy is also our North Star. It's our guidance. It's not necessarily always, in this case, not about being punitive, but about saying this is who we are. And I absolutely agree. We should be a lot stronger and clear that these are written as principles, because I think this is where people go to see, are we living out what we've written? Otherwise, we are talking about equity, again, several board members have said it, it means something different to everyone, and this is the place to say, here is who we are, and this is the standard that we're holding ourselves, and ultimately, we're ascribing to this. We're not there yet. This policy isn't going to automatically have a list of things that follow behind it. We are literally doing this in front of the public as we go, so there's no next at this point other than saying, we keep talking, let me speak for myself, I keep talking about the importance of acknowledging that equity is not equality. We have used a million illustrations to show people what we mean. This, for me, is the best illustration that a governing body can do, is put it in writing to say, this is where we stand and this is how we stand. I'm completely open to changing the language so that people can feel comfortable and confident. What I'm not okay with is not having an equity policy for a district this size who have won, if not most of us, have talked about the importance of equity in some way, shape, or form, various ways. It's been important to us, but I do think that this is how we tell the public who we are as a governing body. If it's not written, we're just talking about it.
Sure.
And there's no accountability to us. The rest of our policies in the Red Book are accountability to our students and our community and our families. We're saying this is our expectation of you. This, for me, is us saying this is our expectation of this governing body of 9.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
So I did hear a couple of things that I'd just like to recap in terms of language.
Thank you, Dr.
So the definition of equity could use some massaging, and I did get the definition from Ms. Cash, but also Mr. Haggerty in terms of, the clarity, focused on what our goals are as an organization, perhaps centering Part B as opposed to the language that's there. And that's certainly something we can go back. And if you have examples, we'd be more than willing to kind of look at those and perhaps use that language for some adjustments that we would make.
Thank you, Dr. Trice.
Mm-hmm.
Any other feedback and you want to give Dr. Trice? I think I hear more or less consensus to go forward and I respect your point of view, Dr. Martin. I do sincerely hear your concerns. I just fall in the camp that I think as a governing body, having this policy is important right now, particularly that we did have similar language in the strategic plan, and we have been talking in student achievement that our results are still too predictable. So and the work needs to continue. I'm not saying we haven't made progress, but I think it's important to lift it up, continue to lift it up in policy.
I appreciate this lifting up the need for the strategic plan in Part C to embrace the principle of equity as a key feature and outlines measurable outcomes to attain the goal of preparing all students for college and career readiness. I mean, I think it's cohesive. I can't add any more to what Ms. Johnson-Hostler said. I think, it's just ditto.
Thank you, Ms. Happy. Dr. Martin.
Well, I still feel pretty strongly about the difference between policy and governing documents. Again, I cannot reinforce how important equity is. And in that context, I think the definition is really, really critical, because this definition doesn't even come close to what I would define equity to be. It's very narrowly focused on what I would argue is achievement gaps, or has been traditionally described in that context. And equity is so much beyond just achievement gaps that I would really like to see. I mean, I agree with the idea of the principles. I think the Orange County policy had a much stronger perspective. So I would like to see, if and as we move forward with this, the definition be more reflective of what equity actually is and how it would be implemented in a school system. I would like to see the language have language of a strategic plan, to be honest, a mission, a vision, of where we're going. And I would like us to be extremely careful about shalls, right? When you go through and this is something Mr. Bloomberg and I talk about over and over again. When you say the district shall, that's a pretty strong statement, you know. And then you give, just take the second bullet point, right? The shall create a nurture and inclusive, welcoming environment for students, families, and staff. Completely agree that our obligation is to try to create an inclusive and welcoming environment. But that's not something that even can be a shall, because I can do my best to try to create an inclusive, welcoming environment, but that doesn't mean that you're going to feel included and welcomed. There's things that we're not going to understand, particularly as we cross in perspectives and ideologies. So I just encourage us, sort of the 2 points. One is to think very carefully about the definition, make sure it's clear, that it communicates. And secondly, that we be extremely careful about, you know, shalls, ensures, any of that language, because again, I think what we're talking about is there's really aspirational aspects to this work. This is what we need to be doing. This is where our commitment is. And it can't just be an aspiration, you know, we hope pie in the sky, right? It needs to be an aspirational commitment, which is, again, the accountability side I see as part of a strategic plan. So there needs to be that accountability, but it needs to also recognize that, you know, this is not, you know, policy in the general sense that I think people look at and view policy as, you know, a very actionable sorts of things, right? You're going to shall recruit and retain a diverse, culturally competent, administrative, instructional, and support personnel. Want to do that, right? That's important work that we do. As soon as you put that as a shall, you know, I don't want it to be let us off the hook, but at the same time, there's been a lot of work being done to try to make this happen. If you make that as shall language, you're going to be in violation of policy, but I don't know that you're going to change the actual activity about the work that needs to be done. And I would much rather have the commitment to the work that needs to be done than to make statements that make you feel good, but aren't actually going to be implemented.
Right.
I think it's fortuitous that we're pursuing this policy at the same time that formulating the strategic plan. I like the idea of them flowing parallel. So thank you for making those points. Mr. Blumberg.
Obviously not weighing in on whether the board should or should not have a policy, but just on some of the alignment. I do think that it would be helpful for there to be alignment between the definition and then the later provision. So if the focus in the definition is sort of just on students, then if the policy then proceeds to start to address vendors and others, there starts to be a lack of alignment. And so I think it's important that the policy that, you know, the board's all talked about some clarity around it. What is the intended sort of protected groups that are being sought to be lifted up by this, and then for there to be alignment throughout the policy on that. I mean, are we talking about employees as well? Are we talking about vendors and third parties as well? And then there's just times where, and this is a challenging component of an equity policy, where the policy will speak in terms of racial equity or cultural equity, but then at other times it brings in other groups, and so if you look at the definition, but then later when you get into the commitment to the equity and the end of that paragraph, we're talking about cultural factors and social factors, but then there's race and ethnicity and family economics and disability and initial proficiencies, and so. This is in no way critical of some really good initial language, but I think that alignment with the purpose, the coverage, I think will be helpful to kind of make it tight.
Thank you for that feedback, Mr. Blumberg. Ms. Carter.
One quick thing, really quick. The top bullet point on page number 2, I think just for helpful for if that remains in moving forward, like more specific information about how I know it's saying the superintendent or designee can inform district decision-making and strategic planning. Well, that's wide open, and it's talking about using race, gender, socioeconomic background, and other personal characteristics, which I read that and I just see that too being wide open, and what could that mean for families, and if we're including staff, again, depends on where we go with the definition and line up, but just something I just wanted, just when I was reading through it, to mention.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. And I know Dr. Trice, Ms. Mahaffey, sorry. Thank you.
I do want to add, as we're looking at things and discussing, I really appreciated in Orange County's definition, the second paragraph, emphasis on equity calls on every adult to treat every student as capable of success and recognizes the uniqueness and strengths of each student, allowing for differences in time and attention instruction. I just appreciated that piece of the focus on our students and the expectation, and having heard from some of our students in the past who enrolled in an AP course and maybe didn't feel welcome, I appreciated this being in there.
Sure.
You're drawing out some Orange County examples. I appreciate that, Ms. Mahaffey. Thank you. And I printed out the Arlington and not the Orange County, so I'm trying to go back and forth. And Ms. Cash has had another event. She was grateful to be able to, I was very grateful she stayed on with us to participate. Other feedback, comments? Trying to move around. Ms. Superintendent Moore, do you have any guidance for us?
Well, I want to thank the board for the feedback and to ask that you continue to provide feedback either on what you've seen in other policies that you like, or places where you see opportunities to improve, modify, clarify language, so that we can have that feedback collated and inform our work as we move forward, because you will obviously see this again.
And who do we send that to? Because it's June 29th.
I know. And Dr. Trice, I appreciate you bringing us this today. And I know. And I'm so grateful for your service to our district. And I'm so saddened that you're going to be moving so close and yet so far away.
So far away.
But I just thank you so much.
Well, I'd just love to say it's been an honor to work in Wake County. I've got to see all of you kind of operate, and I just appreciate the way this district really keeps students at the center of everything that we do. I don't think there's ever been a time when I didn't see that, so I'm going to miss Wake County as well.
And that's good parting advice for us to keep that focus on, very student-focused. I've heard that from my colleagues in this meeting today, to be positive and student-focused. We will do no wrong when we're really looking out for the interests of students. So thank you, sir, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And I would ask that you send any feedback that you have to Dr. Gardner, and please copy me so that we can both take a look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It takes two people, sir, to do your work. Thank you.
Ms.
So
Kirshner,
thank
I
you
just
for the
too wanted
discussion,
to,
colleagues.
I wanted to echo your comments and recognize Dr. Trice for the work that has occurred in this evolving discussion about a policy with regard to equity. And we appreciate the discussion that you've had today, as well as the discussion that you've had in the last meeting, because it's an important step for where we go with regard to the direction. We needed to hear from you of your position as a board, what you would like to see. And now that we know the direction to go, we can begin to really work in on the language, many of the areas that you have expressed some desire to have continued thought and further thought, deeper thought, and so that we can begin to work on that. So as you look at examples, as you give thought to the current language that has been drafted for some time for your consideration, please do send it to me. You can also copy Julie Crane. We will be working with the team to continuously examine the policy and what it may look like, and I'm sure this will be a progression in looking at what we really want it to say, and to Ms. Johnson-Hostler's point, serving as our North Star about who we are, what we want to be, and the standard we're going to hold ourselves up to in keeping students at the forefront of our work. So, Dr. Trice, thank you. We're going to miss you. We may contract you to continue helping.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Carter, you had your hand up. Did you have a...
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there was any way to get like the feedback that we gave last month, like somehow added and out, because there was quite a bit of input on the definition.
And Dr. Garner, I mean, I'll go through and I'm happy to rewatch the meeting and or ask Dr.
I just didn't know if it was
that.
jotted down somewhere.
I think we have some of that. We can certainly give back. Yes.
Ms. Kinney should have those notes,
Yes.
Ms. Carter. Thank you.
We have them, and Julie Crane consistently takes notes over there while we're capturing thoughts and
And I will
ideas.
follow up with Ms. Carter.
Maybe like a running record of the feedback so that we all have it at all times.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the work today, colleagues, very much. And we finished up on time and early. Any further concerns or as you also will see that there is, similar to student achievement, taking July off. So our next meeting is set for August the 31st. So if there are any burning policy issues in the meantime, let Dr. Garner know. I'm going to try to, I kept thinking, if I can just get to next month. I've been thinking that for 15 months now. But I think July just might be, I'm not going to jinx it. No, I know. I think we have a lot to do ahead of us, and we do. And I'm very grateful for the discussions today. I think we made a lot of these policies stronger, and I've embarked on a very good discussion. So thank you very much. With no further discussion or action, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cash out there in Etherland.